Following Disney's disastrous box office results of the live action Snow White, Disney made the announcement that they're going to be delaying, if not outright canceling, their planned live action remake of Tangled. Now, this has to deal with the fact that Disney was losing with audiences in recent years when it comes to their live action remakes. We saw with Little Mermaid underperformed at the box office, Mufasa, The Lion King, still made a little bit of money for them, but it wasn't nearly as much as what the live action Lion King made. And then we saw this all capped off with Snow White losing hundreds of millions of dollars for the studio. So then they start taking a step back and thinking like, okay, is it that audiences are tired of these live action remakes? Or did they just not like these particular movies? There was also some movies that were pretty far along in the pipeline, like Lilo and Stitch and Moana, which is set to come out later this year. That I think Disney was basically reevaluating things with these movies because they're like, okay, these movies that failed for us were really different from the original animated films. Meanwhile, we have Lilo and Stitch coming out, and presumably Moana is also a little bit more faithful to the original animated films than what these other live action remakes did. So we saw Lilo and Stitch was a little bit more faithful to the original movie, and it saw some success. So it's because of that, Disney is kind of looking at Tangled and thinking like, maybe there is a potential for this movie, but do they understand it's because they have to be faithful to the original movie, or do they just think audiences are just kind of like back to supporting live action remakes, no matter how many changes that they actually make to it? Live action Tangled movie could be back in play if Moana succeeds, but will Disney learn the right lessons? This is coming from That Park Place. The recently shelved live action Tango remake might not be dead after all at Disney. According to a new report from Entertainment Insider Daniel Reichman, Daniel RPK, Disney is quietly considering reviving the dormant project, but only if its upcoming Moana remake performs well at the box office. Now, I don't know anything about the live action remake of Moana except for that it's supposed to come out later this year, but I'm thinking it's because maybe it is more faithful to the original animated film than what we saw with movies like Little Mermaid or Snow White. And this is something that I said about the time when it was announced that Tangled got canceled, that because those other two movies were still in the running, that maybe Disney is just kind of reevaluate what they're going to be doing with Tangled. And I believe at the time I was saying it's clear to Disney that when they're changing this from making these deviations from the source material, audiences don't like that. And if you're going to do that with the live action remake, then that means audiences are not going to support your movie and it's going to fail. Meanwhile, you have other movies that are so far along that look as if they're actually going to be more faithful to the source material. So Disney's going to look at the results of those movies. And if we see that those ones actually succeed when they're trying to be faithful to the source material, then that signals to Disney that people will still support these movies and will go pay to watch these movies in theaters if you are actually faithful to the original animated film. But if those movies fail too, well, then that just signals to Disney that people are not interested in their live action remakes. We saw Lilo and Stitch is highly successful for them. Looking at the box office results, it's so far brought in over $850 million globally. And I believe the budget for it was around $150 million or something. I'd have to double check it. And even now it's still pulling in decent enough numbers after being out for several weeks. 4.5 million, or roughly 4.7 million on Friday, 6.4 million yesterday, 4.4 million today. So those are decent numbers, and it's probably still going to pull decent enough numbers until they eventually put it on the Disney Plus platform, which this just shows Disney that, yes, there still is an appetite for live action remakes, but maybe they're thinking this might be a fluke. So they're just going to wait and see what happens with Moana before they decide to announce for sure whether or not they're going to continue with Tangled or whether they're going to go in a different direction. The live action Tangled film had previously been shelved reportedly due to internal doubts following the disappointing performance of The Little Mermaid and the backlash and major flop surrounding Snow White. But after Lilo and Stitch pulled off a surprising win with audiences and with Moana now positioned as the next big remake, Disney appears to be reevaluating the potential of Tangled, a fan favorite from the 2010 animated era. Now, Lilo and Stitch succeeding at the box office is not really a huge surprise, at least not to me. I don't think there was a lot of people truly surprised by that, because once they released the first trailer for it, it looked like the movie was going to be highly successful because the trailers were well received compared to what we saw with like The Little Mermaid or Snow White, even Mufasa. The later trailers for that were a bit better received, but like the first one that was initially dropped, the reaction to that was fairly negative, and that movie went on to make, I think, a decent, or not a decent, but a little profit for him. Still a far cry from what we saw with the first live action remake of The Lion King. And I say live action because that's what they call it. I mean, I know it's another animated film, but just for the sake of brevity, let's just call it a live action remake. The first one for Lion King did really successful for them. Mufasa made like half as much, or I think less than half as much. So still enough to make a profit for them, but not nearly as good as what they previously did. And I think a lot of it was just riding the coattails of the previous movie. And that's why it was able to find some success. But Snow White left no room for doubt. I think that Disney was like, all right, we can't just make a live action remake of any type of movie and people are automatically just going to gobble up. You have to approach it from, I don't know, from a different method, not necessarily just expecting name recognition alone to be enough to make it successful. You have to actually follow through and make something that audiences would enjoy watching. We saw that with Lilo and Stitch, and while a lot of people do have their grievances with it, I can't say for sure because I never watched it. From what I heard about it, it sounds like something that I really want to enjoy, but as far as general audiences go, they seem to enjoy it. Word of mouth for Lilo and Stitch was pretty good, all things considered, and even though there was deviations, it wasn't so much so that it was alienating the fans of the original movie, or at least a lot of the fans of the original movie. And that's why the movie was still able to be successful. We don't know what they're doing with Moana. Maybe that's going to be one that's different from the original movie. And if that's the case and the movie's successful, then Disney's kind of like, we don't know what to do now, because if we're faithful to the original one, we're successful. If we're deviating from the original one, we're still successful, unless we're these other movies. So that it really doesn't paint a clear picture for them what to expect. But I'm thinking Moana is one that's going to be more like the original animated film. So Disney's waiting to see with that. And if that's also successful, then it signals to them like, okay, we can make a live action remake of Tangled, but we just have to be more faithful to the original animated film compared to what we did with Little Mermaid or Snow White, because obviously going so far away from it is not going to be enough, or is not going to be a good recipe for success. The report signals a broader trend at Disney. Certain remakes soar while others crash and burn. It's becoming increasingly clear that the biggest indicator of success isn't just nostalgia or brand recognition, it's fidelity to the source material and the absence of ideological detours. And I think that's also the biggest or a really big factor here, as long as it doesn't have any ideological messaging within the movie. Disney's live action, The Lion King, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast all drew heavily from their animated counterparts with appropriate casting and saw strong box office returns as a result. Even Lilo and Stitch, despite initial skepticism in the wake of Snow White, seems to have found footing by preserving the heart of the original story. Of course, there are some major changes made that the movie's ending, but that's another story for another day. And it's not something fans know when going into the film or for the first time. Yeah, but if they made so many different changes, because the marketing for Lilo and Stitch made it seem as if it was going to be a lot more faithful to the original movie than what it turned out to actually be. And if the word of mouth coming out of the opening weekend was terrible, then we wouldn't have seen it have the box office hold that it's had. So I think the changes that they made were minor enough that it didn't really detract or alienate fans of the original movie, or at least not most fans of the original movie. And that's why it was still able to be successful. So Disney could learn from this that they can make some changes to the source material, just so long as they're not pushing any political ideology in it, and the changes aren't so severe that it alienates fans of the original source material. Then you could probably find some success with your movies. Now, there's going to be a lot of people out there going to be upset about this because if they are probably upset with or tired of the fact that Disney is just apparently out of ideas and they're just left with remaking movies, and they would rather go back to a time when they were trying to create new IPs as opposed to just recycling the existing ones that they have. But in all honesty, this is kind of just up to the audiences because Disney has Elio. That's an original movie coming out, and there's really no hype surrounding that. And by all accounts, it looks like that movie's going to be a huge flop for them, even if they didn't spend nearly as much as what they spent on it. It just seems like people are not interested in it. And that just kind of tells Disney, it's like, you know what? People want remakes, sequels, reboots, all this other stuff. And Disney they kind of just giving the audiences what they want. If that's what they're going to be doing, saying like, okay, people just want faithful adaptations of the animated films. That's what they're going to support in theaters. So that's what we're going to make. So if you kind of have a problem with that, I mean, you really have no one to blame but audiences themselves. But if Disney is just remaking stuff, but they're making changes to try to push an agenda and those fail, well, that is also telling Disney we don't want to have this stuff. And I think Disney has started to learn that lesson. They're maybe going to get a little bit more subtle with their messaging, but you can't just be as overt, because it's become apparently clear to everyone at this point that that's not how you make a successful movie. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.